Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready to explore history's hidden corners.
This time, we're tackling one of the biggest names in ancient history, Alexander the Great.
Ah, yes, the man, the myth, the legend.
Exactly. And we're basing this deep dive on a book simply titled Alexander the Great. Short and sweet.
Gets right to the point.
Which is good because there's a lot to cover. Get this, his reign was only 12 years.
Wow, only 12 years.
12 years. But the impact, it echoes through history even today.
That's what makes him so fascinating. He accomplished so much in such a short time.
Okay, so to kick things off, let's talk military prowess. This guy was a warrior king through and through.
Absolutely. The book really emphasizes that Alexander wasn't just handed a kingdom. He had to fight for it.
Oh, yeah. Tell me more about that.
Well, when his father, Philip, was assassinated, the Macedonian kingdom was thrown into chaos. Philip had spent years building this powerful army, ready to take on the Persian Empire, right? But with his death, everything was up in the air.
It's hard to imagine being in Alexander's shoes at that moment.
He was only 20 years old, suddenly thrust into this position of immense power and responsibility.
And he had enemies all around him. Didn't some of the Greek city-states rebel against him?
Yep, Thebes in particular was a major challenge. They were a powerful city-state, and their rebellion was a direct threat to Alexander's authority.
So what did he do?
He made an example of them, crushed the rebellion, destroyed the city, and sold the inhabitants into slavery.
Wow, talk about sending a message.
It was a brutal act, but it also shows the realities of power in the ancient world. There were no international laws or peacekeeping forces back then. Strength and ruthlessness were often seen as essential for survival.
And speaking of strength and ruthlessness, let's talk about Alexander's clash with the Persian Empire. It's kind of a classic David and Goliath story, right?
In a way, yes. But the book highlights how it wasn't just about numbers. The Greeks, including the Macedonians, were famous for their disciplined fighting style. They fought in close formations, emphasizing hand-to-hand combat. The Persians, on the other hand, relied more on overwhelming numbers and cavalry.
It makes you wonder how Alexander managed to pull off these victories against such a massive empire.
Well, the book points to some specific events and personality traits that give us clues. Like, remember the story of Bucephalus?
The wild horse no one could tame.
That's the one. Alexander managed to ride him when he was just 13 years old.
I always loved that story.
The book suggests that Alexander figured out the horse was scared of its own shadow, so he just turned it to face the sun.
Pretty clever.
It shows his problem-solving skills, his ability to think outside the box. And then there's the famous story of the Gordian knot.
Ah, yes. That ridiculously complicated knot that was said to be impossible to untie.
The prophecy said whoever untied it would rule all of Asia.
So what did Alexander do? Spend hours trying to untie it.
Nope. He just drew his sword and sliced the thing in half.
Straight to the point.
The book argues that this wasn't just impatience. It was a calculated move to show his decisiveness, his willingness to break the rules.
And speaking of breaking the rules, let's talk about the siege of Tyre.
Ah, yes. Tyre. The island city that was considered practically impregnable.
Alexander wasn't fazed.
Not one bit. He built this massive land bridge, a causeway, straight to the island.
Imagine the engineering feat.
It was incredible. He had to battle storms, doubts from his own engineers, even flaming ships that the Tyrians sent to try and destroy the causeway.
It sounds like something out of a movie.
It was a testament to his persistence, his unwavering determination.
Okay, so we've seen how skilled he was on the battlefield. But there's more to leadership than just military tactics.
Absolutely. And that's where we start to delve into Alexander's ambition and the complexities of his personality.
The book really gets into the psychology of Alexander, doesn't it?
It does. You see, it argues that Alexander wasn't just a conqueror. He was driven by a thirst for glory, a desire to achieve great deeds that would make him immortal.
It's like he wanted to leave his mark on the world.
Exactly. And he wasn't afraid to make sacrifices to achieve that goal. Remember that story about him dividing all his wealth among his generals before setting out on his conquest?
He kept only hope for himself, right?
That's right. It shows that this wasn't about personal gain for him. It was about something much bigger.
And that ambition led to some pretty impressive victories. The Battle of Granicus River, the Battle of Issus, where he defeated the Persian king Darius III.
Incredible victories. And what's interesting is that he didn't just conquer and move on like so many other rulers at the time. He actually tried to incorporate the conquered lands into his empire.
That's right. He adopted Persian customs, promoted cultural exchange, even married a Persian noblewoman, Roxana.
He was trying to create something new, a fusion of East and West, a truly cosmopolitan empire. But here's where things get a bit complicated.
Oh, how so?
The book suggests that this same ambition that fueled Alexander's rise, that drive for glory, it also had a dark side.
Hmm. I'm sensing a but coming.
Well, as his power grew, so did his paranoia and ruthlessness. It's like the weight of his own ambition started to consume him.
And that's what we'll be digging into next time. So last time we were talking about how Alexander's ambition, that drive that led him to conquer so much, also had a darker side.
Yeah, it's like a classic tale, right? Power corrupts.
And the book gives some pretty chilling examples of this shift in Alexander. Like, what about the execution of Parmenio, his most trusted general?
That's right, Parmenio. Imagine that. You fought countless battles alongside this man. He's your closest advisor. And then suddenly,
He's executed for suspected treason.
it's just a stark reminder of how paranoia can take hold, even in the most brilliant minds.
It's like, who can you trust when you're at the top?
Exactly. Everyone's motives become suspect.
And it wasn't just Parmenio. The book also talks about the death of Clitus.
Oh, Clitus, another close friend of Alexander's, killed during a drunken argument.
So what happened?
Well, Clitus made the mistake of criticizing Alexander, comparing him unfavorably to his father, Philip,
Oh, that's never a good idea.
especially not when Alexander's already feeling the pressure of leadership.
And he was known to have a bit of a temper, right?
Yeah. This incident really highlights the isolating effects of power.
It's like he was surrounded by yes men who were too afraid to challenge him.
And without that critical feedback, leaders can make some pretty bad decisions.
Which brings us to, well, one of Alexander's biggest mistakes. The book describes this mutiny of his own army.
Oh yeah, they were marching eastward, deeper and deeper into India. The men were exhausted. They had achieved so much already.
But Alexander wanted to keep going.
Further east, he was convinced he was destined to conquer the world, to reach the ends of the earth. But his men, even the most loyal ones, had reached their limit.
I guess you can push people only so far.
Right. And it's like this insatiable desire for more, even when it's clear that everyone, including himself, was paying the price.
So after all these victories, all these setbacks, Alexander dies at the young age of 32. Hard to believe, right?
It really is, this larger-than-life figure, gone so soon.
And the book raises a really interesting question. Was his empire even sustainable?
It's something historians have debated for centuries. On one hand, he created this vast multicultural empire, stretching from Greece all the way to India.
That's hard to even fathom that kind of scale.
I know, right? But on the other hand, he died without a clear heir.
So what happened?
Well, his empire was quickly divided amongst his generals, which, as you can imagine, led to decades of conflict and instability.
A bit of a mess, to say the least.
Definitely. It's like, what would have happened if he had lived longer? Would he have been able to hold it all together? Would he have focused on building stronger institutions like, say, the Roman emperors who came later?
It's impossible to know for sure, but the book does draw some interesting comparisons to figures like George Washington.
Who focused more on creating systems of governance that would last.
Exactly, instead of just expanding territory.
It's a different kind of legacy.
Speaking of legacy, though, we can't forget about Alexander's funeral procession.
Oh, man. This thing was epic.
The book describes this elaborate plan to carry his body over 1,000 miles to the oasis of Siwa in Egypt.
The place where he was declared the son of the god Ammon.
Talk about going out in style.
Right. It wasn't just about transporting his body. It was about solidifying his image as a divine figure, even in death, like a final grand performance.
A fitting end for a king who lived his life on such a grand scale.
Absolutely. And even though his body didn't end up in Siwa, he was eventually entombed in Alexandria.
The city he founded in Egypt.
The very same. Which, by the way, became a major center of learning and culture for centuries.
It's kind of ironic, right? This conqueror who spent his life conquering and expanding.
And one of his most lasting legacies is this incredible city built on trade, knowledge, and cultural exchange.
It's like a different side of him comes through in that.
It makes you think about the different facets of his personality. The conqueror, the visionary, the ruthless leader, the charismatic figure who inspired so much loyalty.
Is he full of contradictions?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what makes him so fascinating to study.
But was founding Alexandria totally out of character for him, given everything we've talked about, I mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe it was a glimpse of what could have been if he focused more on building and less on conquering. But who knows? Maybe that relentless drive was just inseparable from who he was.
Maybe it was all part of the same ambition, just expressed in a different way.
It's like we're still trying to figure him out, even after all these centuries.
And that's what makes history so compelling. It's not just about the past, it's about how we understand ourselves in the present.
Well said.
We've talked about his military genius, his ambition, his flaws, but there's another aspect of Alexander that the book explores that I find really fascinating: his relationship with the mystical and the divine.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other layer to his story. In today's world, if a leader claimed to be the son of a god, people would be pretty skeptical. But for Alexander, it was a powerful tool.
It gave him legitimacy.
Exactly. The book talks about his journey to the oracle at Siwa in Egypt.
The sacred site dedicated to the god Ammon.
Right. And it was there that Alexander was supposedly confirmed as the son of Zeus Ammon.
What a power move.
Seriously. It would have legitimized his rule in the eyes of many, especially in Egypt, where the pharaohs were considered to be living gods.
So he's using religion to his advantage.
In a way, yes. But I think it was more than just a cynical ploy. There's a sense that Alexander genuinely believed in his own divine destiny, which, in a way, makes him even more fascinating, don't you think?
I mean, it's like you said, right? People back then would have seen this totally differently than we do now.
Well, absolutely. It's a
Got
different world, different beliefs.
And the book talks about how Alexander, well, he kind of used this to his advantage, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. He was a master of, let's say, PR.
I mean, the book mentions how he even used a solar eclipse to motivate his troops.
It's true. A solar eclipse. Can you imagine? People back then, they didn't have the scientific explanations we do now.
He was freaked out.
Totally. They would have seen it as, like, a sign of the gods, a bad omen.
But not Alexander.
Nope. He spinned it, right? He consults his soothsayers.
Those were like the advisors who interpreted signs and omens.
Exactly. And they tell him, hey, this eclipse, it's a sign that the Persians are doomed.
So he turns a potential disaster into like a pep talk for his army.
It's brilliant, really. It shows how much power belief and symbolism can have, even when, well, logic might suggest otherwise.
We think we're so rational today, but...
We're still influenced by stories, by symbols. That's part of being human.
And it's not like Alexander was the only one to do this, right? I mean, the Egyptian pharaohs were considered living gods.
Oh, yeah. And the Roman emperors, many of them were deified after their deaths.
It's like maybe we have this need to see our leaders as something more than just, ordinary people.
Especially in times of crisis, right? We're looking for someone to offer not just solutions, but hope. A sense of purpose that goes beyond the everyday.
We want our leaders to be almost superhuman.
To bridge that gap between the human and the divine. And in a way, I think Alexander still fulfills that role for many people.
Even after all these centuries?
He's still that larger-than-life figure, the mythical hero who embodies ambition, courage, the pursuit of the impossible. I mean, just look at how many books, movies, even video games are still made about him.
It's like his story never gets old.
It resonates with something deep within us, I think.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what does Alexander's story mean to you? What lessons do you take away from it?
I think it's a story of incredible ambition and achievement, but also a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power. It's a reminder that even the most brilliant and charismatic leaders are still human, with all the flaws and complexities that come with it.
Well said. And I think it's also a reminder that history is more than just facts and dates.
It's about stories, stories that can teach us, challenge us, and inspire us.
So keep exploring those stories, keep asking questions, and until next time, keep diving deep.